we are honored to have Professor L.A. and Paul with us. Professor Paul is a professor of philosophy and cognitive science at Yale University, and she's here to talk to us about her thought experiments, Becoming a Vampire, a thought experiment in decision theory.
Thanks for having me.
So to begin with, can you tell us what the thought experiment is about and what the origin of the thought experiment was, which was from your book, which was published in 2015, and then we'll get into some more details about the thought experiment.
Okay, so the thought experiment is basically designed to give us a sense, using a simple example, of something that turns out to be rather complex and difficult. So what I ask you to do is to imagine that you have a one-time only chance to become a vampire. Imagine that you're touring a castle somewhere in Eastern Europe and Dracula comes to you and tells you that he wants to make you one of his own. He tells you this is a one-time chance, that you need to rush back to your Airbnb and reflect on what you'd like to do, that if you'd like to become a vampire, leave your window open at midnight. If you decide you don't want to become a vampire, keep your window closed, leave at dawn and never come back. Now, before you rush off to your Airbnb, he tells you, look, I think you should take this opportunity because becoming a vampire will give you amazing new sensory powers, incredible physical capacities. You'll look amazing in black. You'll have excellent taste. You'll be witty. Everyone will think that you have some kind of magnetic amazingness. So obviously, this is something you should want to do, right? So, Dracula tells you all of these positive things. You go back to your room, you think about the possibilities, you text your friends, you call your mom. After you text your friends and call your mom and talk with them tell them about this opportunity, they tell you that they have already decided to become vampires. And this surprises you. And so you start to ask them about it. And what they say as well, they confirm everything that Dracula's already told you. But of course, they also confirm that you have to drink blood. They say this could be artificial blood so that you can kind of try to avoid various kinds of ethical dilemmas, but it's blood nonetheless. You'll find it amazing and it'll have nuances and flavor that maybe you couldn't have appreciated when you were human. And yes, you'll have to avoid sunlight and sleep in a coffin. And in many ways, you will become a kind of monster. But then after you press them a little bit more and you ask them, is this something that, that they think you should do? They say, well, we do think you should do it. We think, becoming a vampire is a fabulous opportunity. We're really happy with our choice, but you can't possibly understand what it's like as a mere human. You're going to have to take our word for it. Life has meaning and a sense of purpose now that it never had when we were human, but it's just not something that you can understand. So that's the situation that you're in. You have until midnight. And the problem is that if you want to make this life-changing, impossible to manage choice, you don't know what you really need to know. In other words, you can't know what it's like to become a vampire, to be a vampire, until you actually become one. But the choice is irreversible. So you have to make your choice without knowing something deeply salient and really important factor about the choice, which is, what are you making yourself into? What is it going to be like? What is the rest of your life going to be like? Right, until maybe you get a stake through the heart. It's going to be a long, long life to become a vampire. So that's the thought experiment.
Great, thank you. And the thought experiment, before talking about the thought experiment itself, that came from one of the books that you published in 2015 by Oxford University Press, Transformative Experience. So for the purpose of that, can you define what is an epistemologically transformative experience?
Yes. So the way that I describe all of this is I say, look, the chance to become a vampire is a transformative experience. You're going to transform into something, basically into an entirely new kind of being. And I say that even though obviously this is an imaginative thought experiment and we don't ordinarily get the chance to become vampires, that it captures something that we do actually experience all the time in our lives. And that is, it captures the transformative experience of undergoing a life-changing event. And the kinds of examples I give are becoming a parent, or maybe going to college, or leaving home for the first time, or joining the military, that kind of thing. And the way that I explore what a transformative experience is they say, look, it's got two components. It involves an epistemic transformation and it involves a personal transformation. So an epistemically transformative experience is an experience that changes what you know, But the catch is that it can only change what you know through having an experience. And you have to have that experience to know basically this new opportunity. In other words, to know what it's like, for example, to become a vampire. Or sometimes I talk about, say, if someone were colorblind, they'd have to have a retina operation or wear chroma glasses in order to know what it's like to see red. And someone can tell you all about what it's like to see red. Someone can tell you all about what it's like to become a vampire or to be a parent for that matter. But until you actually experience that, there's something essential about the nature and character of that experience that you can't know. And when you do experience it, you will undergo an epistemic transformation. That is, you'll have an experience and learn something that you couldn't have learned any other way. Now, the thing is, epistemic transformations can be smaller, they can be big. And what's interesting, I think, are epistemic transformations that are big. And these big epistemic transformations also lead to what I call a personal transformation. And a personal transformation is something that changes you in a very deep and fundamental way. And as I describe it in my book, it just, it changes some of your core kind of personal or fundamental preferences, what you care about most. If you think about it, if you undergo a radical epistemic change and all of a sudden, you discover something dramatically new, then it's likely to kind of reorganize what you care about in important ways. If you discover seeing color for the first time, or what it's like to be a parent, or you see death in front of you, or fear for your own life for the first time, that's going to reorganize some of the things that you care about most. And that then will create a personal transformation. And what I take a real transformative experience to be is just the combination of the epistemic and the personal change.
Mm-hmm. And that's where you make the distinction between the self that makes the decision and the self that bears the results of that decision. So in the past 10 years of my life, I've kind of migrated to 3 different countries. And sometimes my friends back in my home country ask me if they should, go to another country or not. And I tell them, look, I can't really tell you because I'm telling you from my current perspective. But if you asked me 10 years ago, the answer might have been completely different. And I could be wrong, but I watched a few documentaries earlier. And when I read your thought experiment, I was reminded of those documentaries about people who have a gender reassignment surgery and what they go through after that and how they interviewed them before and after. And the way they would talk about their experience was quite fascinating to me. And when I read your experiment, so to compare it to another example, maybe, that's what I thought about. So I could be wrong, I don't know, but I tend to think of it also as an epistemologically transformative experience.
Yes, I think there are a lot of different kinds of examples, and transitioning to a new gender would be one of them. The interesting things about some of these changes and some of these experiences, before one undergoes the experience, there's a kind of level of being unsure. Is this something I really want? One of the interesting things about gender transitioning is that people tend to be very sure of what they want, and they tend to also be very satisfied with the result. So that's somewhat of a special case, but it's definitely, I think, a transformative experience. Some of the cases that I've been really interested in are cases where people are kind of unsure. And one of the funny things about a transformative experience is, as you say, is that who you are changes in a really substantial way. And the interesting thing is, once you've changed, then it becomes very hard to sort of get yourself back into the mindset or back into the shoes of that former self. And so to make a kind of meaningful comparison between your life before the change and your life after is extremely difficult. I think it's quite common for people to be like, I'm really happy with who I am now. And that's perfectly rational. But before they changed, like, again, parenting is a good example for me, because I think people can sometimes be unsure then the self that they were then, in a sense, can't get into the head of the self that they'll become. And so you can't make the choice to become that new self if it's going to be epistemically transformative, because there's a way in which you can't get into the head of that future self. So you have to kind of take a leap. And there's a sort of leap of faith involved in all of this that I think is like really important. And then again, just going back to gender transitioning, happens there as well. But I think there people feel that this is something that they have to do, and it's less of a choice in the sense of being unsure about should they transition or not. I think people just think, I have to do this. But then they cross that divide, and I think they probably lose contact with the self that they were before the transition.
It's kind of a cheeky question, I guess. How can we make a rational decision when faced with an epistemologically transformative experience? Based on what you said, we do have some certain set of evidence, but we don't really know the outcome. So I guess the question of making a rational decision might not be the right question.
No, I think that's right. I think if you believe that all the possible outcomes are going to be good, then there's a sense in which it can be rational to do it. But you're not doing it then based on primarily what you think it's going to be like. You're doing it based on the fact that whatever it's going to be like, things are going to be better. And the same goes if you're faced with something where all the options are bad, then you don't want to do it. But you don't do it because you know what it's going to be like. It's rather you just know whatever it's going to be like, it's going to be bad. The interesting cases, the especially difficult cases for rational decision making, involve cases where some of the outcomes are good and some of the outcomes are bad, right? So you would be these interesting cases of transformative experience, some of them where it's not so much about the rationality of the decision, but then other cases where some of the outcomes could be good and some could be bad, where at least ordinarily we want to say, well, we want to do whatever's rational. And what I try to talk about in my book is to say, look, if you can't know what it's going to be like, to occupy those future shoes of your future self, then don't fool yourself. Understand the basis on which you're making the decision. It can be rational if you say, well, look, I'm just going to take the chance and discover who I'm going to become. But it's not rational if you think, oh, I have some special sight into my future self across this divide. I know what it's going to be like. And so I know I can make the decision based in an informed way. And I think that's a way in which we often fool ourselves.
Professor L.A, Paul, thank you very much for talking to us and making time for us.
Thank you.